Imagine waking up in your tent to footsteps circling just outside, but when you unzip it, there's nothing, just silence. In tonight's video, we're diving into the 10 most disturbing true Appalachian camping horror stories, real accounts from people who hiked in and never looked at the woods the same way again. If you love spine-chilling tales that blur the line between the natural and the unexplainable, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's tuning in. And after the last tale, drop a comment telling me which story messed you up the most. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Your support helps us keep bringing you terrifying stories from the darkest corners of the wilderness. Now zip up your tent and don't look too closely at the tree line. I was 4 nights into a solo campout just off the Nolichucky River, not far from where the bend curves hard west and the trees grow thick enough to make you forget the sky. It wasn't a marked site, just a clearing I'd found years ago hidden past an overgrown game trail about 20 yards from the water, close enough to hear the river, far enough to stay dry if it rained. I came out here sometimes when life got too loud. No phone, no news, just the sound of crickets, barred owls, and the wind nudging through pine. I'd grown up in these hills, knew them like the back of my hand, but this spot always felt a little removed, like it didn't want to be found. The first 2 nights were nothing special. Cool air, early autumn leaves, soft dirt under the sleeping pad. I journaled, I cooked, I listened to the quiet. But on the 3rd night, somewhere around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't rustling or snorting like deer. It wasn't wind either. It was a soft, steady tick, tick, echoing faintly through the trees, rhythmic, too clean to be natural, like the sound a pocket watch makes when it's close to your ear, only louder, more deliberate. At first I thought maybe something mechanical, an old fence gate shifting, but it was deep in the woods, maybe 100 feet off, and it didn't stop, just kept ticking. I stayed in the tent, barely breathing. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some animal tapping a branch or dragging a stick. But the noise wasn't random, it was metered, consistent, just tick, tick, like a countdown that never sped up, never slowed. When the sun came up, I checked the woods in that direction. To nothing there, no trail, no trash, not even footprints. But I noticed something else. My compass was off, not wildly, but enough. It pointed just a hair east of north, when I knew for a fact it should have been true. I tapped it, swirled it, same result. I figured maybe the metal in my gear threw it off, but even moving 20 feet in any direction didn't fix it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not well. I lay in the tent, flashlight in my hand, knife under the pad, just waiting. At 2:07 a.m., the ticking started again. This time, it was closer, maybe 50 feet out, same direction, still deliberate, still wrong. I sat up, listened. It didn't get faster or louder, it just was. But I unzipped the tent halfway and shined my light into the brush. Nothing, just shadows and mist clinging to the lower trunks. The ticking stopped the moment my beam hit the trees. I waited until dawn before stepping out. That morning, I noticed something else. A small pile of river stones stacked near the fire pit. 3 flat rocks I hadn't placed there. Too neat to be accidental, too clean to be run off. I looked around for tracks, but the soil was packed tight, and the dew had already dried. It wasn't fear yet. Not really. Just a growing sense that something wasn't right. Not the kind you run from, the kind you live with, like a draft under the door. That night, I decided to stay awake. I needed to know what it was. But I started a low fire, just embers and flicker, then sat with my back against a log and waited, flashlight ready, eyes open. At exactly 2:04 a.m., I heard it, tick, 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 closer now, maybe 20 feet out. That I stood, flashlight on, and stepped toward the sound, carefully, 1 foot at a time. It didn't run, didn't stop, just kept ticking, like it wanted me to follow. 10 paces in, the beam caught something hanging from a low branch, a pocket watch, old, brass, cracked down the center, its face spider-webbed with age. It swung gently, like it had been placed there moments before. The second hand was moving, smooth, steady, and going backwards. I stared at it, confused, breathing through my mouth. The air smelled burnt, not like firewood, more like old rubber and copper, the smell of something shorting out. My skin prickled. I reached out, touched the chain, cold, too cold. The watch stopped ticking. The moment my fingers grazed the face, just stopped. I unhooked it and turned it over. No initials, no branding, just a worn engraving on the back I could barely make out. When the minutes return, so will you. I didn't understand. I still don't. I pocketed the watch, hiked back to camp, and packed up before dawn. Something in me said I shouldn't stay, not because I was in danger, but because I'd heard it. And once you've heard it, you don't unhear it. I didn't sleep well after that. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing small things. My bedroom clock would freeze at 2:07 a.m. every night. My phone alarm refused to ring if set around that time. Even my wristwatch started acting up, second-hand stuttering, reversing for minutes at a time. I visited a local antique dealer in Burnsville just to ask about the watch. Didn't show it, just described it. He went quiet and said, "You found it near the bend, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He just nodded slowly and muttered, "They always do." I never pressed for more. That was 7 months ago. I don't camp anymore. I can't. I've tried, but I start to hear it again. Every time I'm alone in the woods. Every time the world goes quiet. Tick, tick. I still have the watch. I've tried to throw it out, bury it, even drive it 2 counties away. It always ends up back on my nightstand, ticking backwards. And every time I ask myself the same thing: what happens when it runs out? I hiked up to Standing Bear Ridge 2 days after quitting my job. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, except my sister. I needed quiet, and the ridge was the kind of place people only find if they're trying to. The map shows a thinning trail just past Waterville, up along the slope that splits the Carolina border, but by the time you're 2 miles in, it's more deer path than trail. I had my pack, a tarp tent, enough food for 5 nights, and Boone, my dog, part shepherd, part mutt, smarter than me some days. He's the kind that never barks unless it matters. We made camp in a small clearing just below the tree line, facing west. You could see layers of blue ridges fading into Tennessee, and when the wind dropped, the only sound was the trees adjusting. The ground was soft with moss and dry needles, a low fire, damp air, everything I wanted. The first night was uneventful, cold enough to stay zipped in tight, but not bad. I wrote in my journal. Boone curled at the flap of the tent and kept watch. Second night, things felt thinner, like the air was missing something. The woods were too still after sundown. No crickets, no whip-poor-wills, just silence that pressed in from the trees. Around midnight, Boone sat up, not like he was stretching, like he was alert. Then came the growl, low, not aimed at anything specific, just toward the tree line. His hackles went up, ears stiff. I sat up slowly, flashlight in hand. "Probably a coyote," I whispered, but then I heard it, whispering, to not one voice, many, overlapping, layered like a broken radio frequency, some high, some guttural, like throat-scraped whispers, none close enough to pinpoint, none loud enough to understand, but they were there, not wind, not animals, real voices. I held the light up, scanned the brush, nothing moved, but Boone didn't stop growling. He wouldn't even look at me when I called his name, just kept that stare fixed forward, tail stiff, body locked. I took out my phone and hit record, more out of instinct than anything else. I wanted proof it wasn't in my head. The whispering lasted maybe 5 minutes, then it stopped, like someone cut the cord. Boone lay back down eventually, but he didn't sleep, neither did I. The next morning, I played the recording back. At first, it was nothing but wind and static, but then, voices, clearer than I remembered. They were saying my name, over and over, then Boone, and again, and again. The tone started low, like a chant, then it sharpened, almost angry. My name and Boone's repeated, overlapping, distorted like they were being funneled through something broken. It stopped abruptly, like a door slammed shut. I didn't say anything out loud, just locked the phone screen and looked at Boone. He was watching the trees again. Something wasn't right here. I stayed one more night, part pride, part denial. Told myself it was a trick of the wind, or my own stress feeding on itself. But I didn't unpack fully that third evening, kept everything tight and ready, just in case. The woods were colder that night. The mist rolled in earlier than before, low and thick, clinging to the brush. Even the fire felt dimmer, like the smoke didn't want to rise. Around 11:30, Boone started pacing. No growl this time, just tension, ears twitching. Every time he looked toward the tree line, his tail dropped lower. He didn't want to be here. I didn't either. I sat with the recorder app open, the screen glowing soft in my palm. My heart was ticking faster than it should have. Then just past midnight, the voices returned. Fainter now, more distant, but I recognized the cadence, that same broken overlap, like multiple people whispering inside each other. Only this time, there was breathing too. Wet, close, the sound came from both sides of the clearing. Not forward, not behind, like something was circling. The Boone backed up against me, trembling, eyes locked on the dark. The whispers sharpened again, more urgent, not language exactly, but intent. My name twisted inside itself, chopped, stretched, pushed through invisible teeth. I didn't record it this time. I couldn't. Instead, I whispered to Boone, clipped his leash, and we moved. I didn't pack up camp, just grabbed the essentials and left the rest. We hiked down the ridge in near dark, only the headlamp and Boone's instincts guiding us. Every few minutes, I'd hear faint breathing from behind, not footsteps, just breath, like someone pacing me through the trees, just out of reach. By the time we hit the main trail, the whispers were gone, so was the mist. I slept in my truck that night, parked outside a gas station in Hot Springs, windows up, doors locked. Boone finally slept. I didn't. Weeks passed. I tried to explain it to my sister. She told me to get rid of the recording. I didn't, but I also didn't listen to it again. Until last week, I was reorganizing files on my phone, clearing old clutter, and accidentally played it. The voices were still there. Only this time, near the end of the recording, I heard something new. You brought him. Just one voice that time, slow, clear. I looked down at Boone. He was staring at the phone, head tilted, ears flat. He hasn't slept right since, and neither have I. We picked Shady Valley because it was halfway between us, neutral ground. I was coming in from Boone, Evan from Abingdon. We hadn't camped together since we were teenagers, And even then, it was always with Dad. After he passed, we sort of drifted. Birthdays turned into texts. Holidays became maybe next year's. So when Evan called out of the blue and suggested we do something like old times, I said yes, before I could think too hard about it. We parked off a gravel road just outside town and hiked 2 hours in. It was mid-October, the kind of cold that hides in the shade and soaks into your sleeves after sunset. Mist clung to the lower brush, and everything smelled like leaf rot and damp bark. The trail was mostly unmarked, winding through switchbacks and hollows that seemed designed to lose you if you stopped paying attention. We set up camp in a natural bowl, surrounded on 3 sides by ridges, with a small creek running 50 yards downslope. No cell signal, no other tents, just silence, save for the occasional crow or squirrel rustle. It was what I'd hoped for, a chance to reset things with Evan. We made a small fire, boiled instant noodles, talked about nothing. Around 4 p.m., we spotted the pack. It was maybe 30 feet off, propped upright against the base of a pine tree, like someone had just set it down. Faded orange, torn along one side. No name tag, no obvious wear pattern. Evan got there first. "Man, this thing's old," he muttered, brushing dirt from the top flap. Inside was a mess of damp, moldy trail mix, fused to the bottom. A cracked compass, a multi-tool rusted shut, a plastic lighter that didn't spark, and a Ziploc-wrapped notebook, the cheap kind you find at gas stations. The paper was swollen from moisture, edges curling, but most of the ink was legible. The entries weren't dated, just scribbled lines, some short, some rambling. The handwriting got sloppier as it went on. Skipping through, we saw pages about hiking, weather, directions. Then things turned strange. One page just said, "Don't sleep facing the trees." Another, "It stands still until you notice." And the final entry, the one scrawled across a full page, like the writer couldn't stop repeating it. "Don't look at it directly. Pretend you don't see it. Pretend you don't see it. Pretend." It trailed off mid-sentence. Evan laughed nervously, like he didn't want me to know it unsettled him. Some lost hiker, trying to write creepypasta before starving. But I didn't laugh. We left the pack where it was, and went back to the fire. That night, the silence felt different. No owls, no insects, just that low, ambient quiet you only notice when it lasts too long. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to Bo, Evan's mutt, standing rigid near the tent wall, tail stiff, ears perked. Then came the sound, soft, slow, circling, but there were no footsteps, nothing breaking twigs or crunching leaves, just a faint brushing, like something gliding just above the ground, around and around. I held my breath. Evan whispered, "You hear that?" I didn't answer. It circled us for over an hour, never speeding up, never stopping. Bo didn't growl, he just stared. When the sun finally broke through the mist and warmed the nylon, we unzipped the flap and stepped out. The pack was gone. We didn't speak much that morning, packed up in silence, barely made eye contact. Inchirgonting, saysant, barely made eye contact. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud. The air felt heavier, the way the woods suddenly seemed closer, but neither of us wanted to admit we were scared either. We took the long trail out, following the creek downstream, instead of backtracking. The mist never quite lifted, and everything smelled like wet metal and bark. At some point, we found ourselves passing landmarks we didn't remember passing on the way in. A split tree, with charred roots, a stone outcrop shaped like a spine. Maybe we were just tired, maybe we were second-guessing. Evan kept glancing over his shoulder. Bo walked with his ears flat. About a mile from the trailhead, I saw something ahead, slumped against a log. The pack, same faded orange, same tear along the side, sitting there like it had never moved. Evan stopped short. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "We didn't go near it, just veered wide around, and kept walking. I didn't sleep the night I got back, or the next. I kept hearing that brushing sound, in dreams, in the quiet moments before my ceiling fan clicks on. It circled me, always behind, never stepping on anything." 3 nights later, I got a text from Evan. "You been having weird dreams?" I lied, and said no. A week passed. Then he called me, said Bo wouldn't go near the woods anymore, that he kept barking at empty corners of the yard, pacing at the back fence after dark. Evan sounded tired, worn thin. "Do you think we saw it?" he asked. I didn't answer, because the truth is, I did look. That night, in the tent, I looked through the mesh for just a second. I told myself it was nothing, just a branch, a shape. I didn't focus on it, didn't register it fully, but my eyes locked for just a moment, and in that moment, the woods felt aware of me. I never told Evan, and I never read that journal again. I burned it in the fire pit the next night, but sometimes I still hear the last line echoing in my head, right before sleep. "Pretend you don't see it." I hit the trail later than I'd planned. By the time I parked at Grayson Highlands and crossed into the woods near Mount Rogers, the sun had already dipped behind the ridge. That strange amber hue was bleeding through the trees, making the leaf litter glow, and everything else blur into shadow. The air smelled like wet bark and fading wood smoke. I wasn't aiming for any particular site, just hiking to hike, trying to forget how quiet my apartment had gotten since the divorce. My phone had been off for 2 days. I was hoping another 2 would do something, shake something loose, make space for whatever came next. About 4 miles in, as the light started slipping fast, I rounded a bend near an old service spur and saw a flicker through the trees, firelight. I slowed, expecting a campsite. Maybe someone else had beat me out there, but as I got closer, I saw him, an older man, maybe mid-60s, sitting cross-legged beside a small, neatly built campfire. He wore a dark coat and a knit cap, both faded and stiff-looking. A battered canvas backpack sat beside him, the kind you only see in surplus stores now. He didn't move much, just warmed his hands over the flame, staring into it like it held answers. I stopped a few paces away, hesitant. "Evening," I offered. He looked up, nodded once, no smile, no words, then looked back to the fire. I waited a moment longer, but he didn't seem interested in chatting, so I moved on, kept walking another mile, until I found a flat patch near a downed spruce, set up my tent, ate a cold granola bar, didn't light a fire, but the smell of his campfire lingered. That kind of wood smoke sticks to you, in your jacket, your hair, your breath. The next morning, I passed the same spur again, on my way to the ridge trail, but the man was gone. No signs of anyone having been there, no campfire ring, no footprints, just damp ground and scattered needles. I figured he'd packed out early. Late the next day, I reached the ranger station near Elk Garden, one of those old split-log buildings, with dusty windows and a wall map full of thumbtacks. A ranger sat behind the desk, sorting permit slips. I mentioned the man, figured maybe they'd know if he needed help, or had a backcountry pass. He looked up slowly. "Where'd you say you saw him?" "Near that old spur trail, west of Pine Gap, maybe a quarter-mile off." He blinked, then turned in his chair and pulled a folder from a drawer, fumbled through it, then stopped on a page. "That site's been closed off for years," he said. "No active camps, too close to the washout." I frowned. He had a fire going. The ranger shook his head. "Ain't even a fire ring out there anymore." Then after a pause, he added, quieter, There is a marker though. I didn't say anything, neither did he. That night, I slept light, the kind of restless half-sleep where your body stays tense, even when your eyes are closed. By morning, I was heading back. I cut back the same way, determined to see it for myself. The air was heavier now, that brittle kind of cold that settles in fog. Everything felt quieter, like the forest was holding its breath. I found the spur trail again, though it was barely visible, overgrown, moss-covered. The trees here leaned in close, casting long shadows. Even though the sky had started to brighten, the clearing was still there, but it was nothing like I remembered. No fire ring, no blackened logs, no signs of anyone having sat there in days, maybe years. Just a waist-high stone marker sunk into the earth near the edge of the clearing, smooth-faced, damp with moss creeping up its sides. I knelt to read the inscription, already knowing I wouldn't like it. Frank Tolman, Lost in Smoke and Silence, 1981. I stood there a long while. The wind stirred the treetops, but didn't reach the ground. Everything smelled like lichen and wet dirt, not a trace of smoke. Eventually, I circled the marker, just to be sure. No signs of ash, no rocks, nothing burned. And yet, I could still feel the warmth of that fire, just as I had 2 nights earlier. Could picture the man's hands held just above the flames, unmoving. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something slower, something that settled in behind the ribs and stayed quiet, like a wrong memory you've carried so long. It starts to feel real. I didn't tell the ranger I'd gone back, didn't mention the marker when I signed out, but I did take one thing with me, the smell. It followed me back, faint, clinging to the inside of my pack. That same subtle wood smoke, mixed with damp pine and something older, like old canvas and sweat. It faded after a few days, but even now, when the air gets wet and cold, when I walk past someone burning leaves or lighting a fire pit, I get a flash of it. And sometimes, in the reflection of the flame, I think I see a shape, sitting still, watching. I still hike, still go solo, though less often now. But I don't nod at strangers on the trail anymore, and I never follow the smell of smoke off path. I hadn't planned on staying more than 1 night. The idea was to hike out, past the usual campsites, follow the Greenbrier River until the trails thinned, and sleep somewhere no one else would, just me, the water, and the woods. I needed the space. I'd been laid off 2 months earlier, and every day since had felt like pacing inside a box. Same walls, same silence. I thought maybe the quiet out here would feel different, more natural, less suffocating. I followed an unmarked deer path, just off the old rail line near Beard, West Virginia. The trail was barely there, mostly flattened ferns and broken branches, but it hugged the river and curved around a wide bend where the trees thinned out just enough for a tent. Flat ground, soft with pine duff. You could hear the current from where I pitched, a low, steady murmur. I set up camp just before dusk, 1-person tent, forest green, same model I'd had for years, dependable, simple. No one else was out there. No fire rings, no wrappers or boot prints, just wet moss and the fading scent of old rain in the soil. The birds quieted down early, and by nightfall the silence had a thickness to it, like the trees were holding their breath. I didn't sleep well, not because of anything I heard. In fact, it was the opposite. It was too quiet. No wind, no animals, just the kind of stillness that presses in around you and makes you overly aware of every breath, every shift in your sleeping bag. When I unzipped the tent the next morning, the river was steaming faintly, fog lifting in soft ribbons. My boots were damp from dew. I stood to stretch, wiped condensation from my tarp, and that's when I saw it. Another tent, roughly 30 yards upslope, just past a patch of dog hobble and a split pine. in a shallow dip between two knolls. Same olive green dome, same compact design, same rainfly pulled tight. It looked exactly like mine. I stared at it for a long time, just trying to process what I was seeing. It hadn't been there last night. I was sure of it. The approach was narrow and muddy. I would have heard someone setting up, a flashlight, a voice, footsteps, something, but the tent just sat there, closed, still. I waited, made coffee, watched the tree line. No movement, no smell of smoke, no clatter of cookware, nothing. Eventually curiosity pushed me toward it. The trail up was soggy, soft ground that sucked at my boots. The air had that sour, mossy smell of old water pooled where it shouldn't be. When I reached the tent, I noticed the zippers were rusted slightly, the fabric darkened near the seams. Still, it was the same model, same brand tag stitched along the edge. I could see my own tent clearly down below through the trees, identical in every way, but this one felt wrong. I crouched down and knocked lightly on the side. Nothing. I waited, then I slowly unzipped it. Inside, there was no sleeping bag, no gear, no pack, just a thick layer of damp decomposing leaves packed almost to the top, curled at the edges, mottled black and brown. The smell hit fast, sweet and sour, like rotting mulch. I backed away slowly, closed it back up. The zipper dragged like it hadn't been used in a long time. I walked back to camp without looking behind me, and I didn't touch my coffee. I tried to rationalize it. Someone abandoned an old tent. Same model. Coincidence. Maybe the rain disoriented me. Maybe I just missed it the night before. I repeated that to myself like a mantra while I repacked my bag, but I kept catching myself glancing back uphill. It was still there, silent, still zipped. I planned to leave early. I didn't eat, just broke camp and started following the river back the way I came. The fog clung to the bends in the path longer than it should have. My hands felt clumsy, like I'd slept wrong. But maybe a mile down, I paused, because I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, not directly, just movement, a faint dragging, intermittent, like something being pulled slowly through wet undergrowth. I froze, turned, scanned the trees. Nothing there. I kept walking. Another half hour passed, and I heard it again, closer. I picked up the pace, breathing harder now. I told myself it was just runoff, or a fallen branch sliding, or maybe even a deer caught in bramble, but I never saw anything move. Back near the rail bed, I stopped to rest, heart hammering, and that's when I noticed the edge of something green in the brush, down near the river bank. A flash of color half buried in ferns. I didn't want to check, but I did. It was the same tent, rainfly still on, zippers rusted, mud streaked along the base, and inside, again, just rotting leaves, damp, packed, silent. But here's the part I can't shake. When I opened it, nestled near the top of the pile was a torn corner of nylon, same color, same feel, with a hand-stitched label I recognized. It was my label, my name, the one I'd sewn into my own tent years ago, after it ripped on a ridgeline near Waynesboro. I ran, didn't stop until I reached the edge of Beard and cell signal returned, didn't sleep for 2 days. I checked my tent afterward, every inch of it. It's still intact, still smells like campfire and trail dust. But I haven't used it since. Some nights, especially when it rains, I dream about that second tent, not the moment I found it, but the moment before, when I was still alone, still unaware, still safe. And sometimes, in those dreams, I unzip it again, and there's not just leaves, there's something beneath them, but I never get to see what it is, because I always wake up sweating, with the smell of rot in my nose, and the distinct feeling that I brought something back with me, something that's still waiting to be noticed. I hadn't planned to camp in the snow, wasn't even expecting it. To be honest, the forecast had mentioned a cold front, maybe some frost at higher elevations, but nothing heavy. Still, when I reached the ridge overlooking Watauga Lake that afternoon, the clouds were already low and gray, the kind that settle over the trees like a warning. I was about 4 miles up from the trailhead near Oliver Hollow, off an old Forest Service road that barely existed anymore. No signs, no blazes, just deadfall, and the remains of some long-forgotten fire rings buried under moss. I'd camped here once years ago with my brother, back when things felt simpler, before life unraveled, before the constant noise of regret. I pitched my tent under a thick stand of pine near the edge of the overlook. From there I could see the lake far below, glassy and dark, like oil. The wind picked up around dusk, and with it came light flurries. Not enough to worry me, just a soft coating, like powdered sugar on the ground. By nightfall, everything was muted. The fire sputtered out early, and the silence that followed was heavy, like the trees were listening. I zipped into my sleeping bag fully clothed, and left the flashlight beside me. My boots were stacked near the flap. I didn't expect visitors. I didn't expect anything. I must have dozed off around midnight. The kind of half-sleep that never really takes hold, where every sound feels like it's inside your chest. At some point, I dreamed that someone was walking near the tent. Not running, not stumbling, walking. A slow, even crunch. The unmistakable sound of boots on snow. I woke up to it, 3:12 a.m. My watch screen glowed pale blue. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The steps circled once, paused, circled again, slower this time, deliberate, always just outside the fabric, never brushing it, never touching. I held my breath. I thought of everything logical. Deer, elk, even a bear, maybe. But no animal moves like that. A steady pacing rhythm, two-legged, intentional, watching. I reached slowly for the flashlight and flicked it on. Silence. I waited a moment, then unzipped the flap and stepped out, boots laced tight, light sweeping across the snow. No one, nothing. The trees stood still. The wind had died completely. Even the lake below looked frozen in time. I turned full circle. My breath came out in plumes. The cold bit hard at my fingers. Then the sound returned. Crunch, crunch. From behind me, where I'd already looked. I spun with the light. Empty woods. It continued for 5 minutes. Always nearby. Always circling. Never a shape to pin it to. Then, just silence. I stayed out longer than I wanted to. Part of me hoping to catch it, part of me hoping I wouldn't. Eventually, I stepped back inside, sipped up, and sat awake until first light. At dawn, the snow was deeper, maybe half an inch now, light and powdery, but enough to keep a record. I stepped out of the tent slowly, scanning the clearing, my breath catching in the cold. Nothing, just clean, untouched snow, except for one set of prints, mine, leading from the tent flap to the clearing, and back. No others, no circling, no trail, not even faint depressions, just mine. I checked a wider radius, 10 feet, 20, still nothing. Even the pine needles hadn't shifted. The snow was soft, unbroken, like it had erased everything else overnight. I told myself, maybe the snow fell afterward, covered it up, but it hadn't snowed again. After I stepped out, I would have noticed. I did notice. I packed in silence. Every zipper sounded too loud. Every step felt too heavy. The trees weren't watching, but they weren't ignoring me either. As I left the site, I looked back once. The tent's imprint was already softening, fading into the frost, like I hadn't been there at all. Back in town that afternoon, I stopped for gas near Butler, and asked the guy behind the counter if anyone else had been out by the ridge. He shook his head. Nah, that road's been closed off and on. Most folks stick to the maintained sites. I nodded, tried to smile. Then he added, you said near Oliver Hollow, some old logging camps up there. Real quiet. Folks used to go missing back in the day. Snow made it hard to track. He said it casually, like it was a weather report, then rang me up and told me to drive safe. I don't camp in snow anymore. I've tried a few times. Farther south, flatter land, but it never feels right. Too open, too exposed. And every now and then, when it gets cold enough back home, and the ground gets just the right crunch underfoot, I'll catch myself pausing at the front door, listening, not for footsteps, but for the silence that follows them. That same silence I felt up on the ridge. The kind that doesn't welcome you, doesn't threaten you, just waits. We picked a remote stretch of the Appalachian Trail, just past the Tennessee, North Carolina line, near the Roan Highlands. The kind of place that doesn't see much foot traffic once summer ends. October was thinning the leaves and the crowds. That's what we wanted. Solitude. It was me, Darren, Lee, and Micah. All of us mid-30s, sore-kneed, and dragging more memory than muscle these days. We hadn't camped together since college. Too many jobs, kids, excuses. But this trip had been Micah's idea, his birthday, his gear, his route. We hiked in about 6 miles before splitting off onto a side trail that Micah had scouted on topo maps. Eventually we found a small clearing about the size of a living room, sunken slightly, surrounded by high spruce and old rhododendron. The ground was soft and dry. There was a tall rock formation nearby, maybe 7 feet at its highest point, stacked and oddly geometric. We all joked that it looked like some forgotten altar. Micah took a GPS pin on his phone. In case we want to come back someday, he said, half smiling. We pitched tents, boiled dinner, talked about who had changed the most. Around midnight, we all zipped in. No fire. It had rained the night before, and the wood was damp, but the air was still and cold, and the night passed quietly until morning. I woke to the sound of Lee unzipping his tent. I stepped out into the frost-bitten air and felt it immediately. Something was off. The sun was filtering through the trees at a different angle. The slope of the clearing felt wrong, tilted, subtle but noticeable, like the ground had rotated under us while we slept. Micah was staring at his phone. GPS says we're 0.23 miles east of where I marked last night. We all gathered around him. Sure enough, the waypoint from the night before showed us back west, near a bend in the creek. But the creek was nowhere in sight now, just more woods, and more unsettling. The rock formation, gone. Darren walked a slow circle. It was right here. You all saw it, right? We nodded. We'd leaned our packs against it. Lee had taken a leak behind it. Now it was just pine needles and disturbed earth. Not even a stump. Nothing. Tasked. We thought maybe we'd misremembered. A GPS glitch. Maybe the fog had rolled in during the night, and we'd set up in a slightly different place than we thought. But then we noticed the trees, the ones closest to us, especially around the clearing, looked new, not small, not young, just fresh. Their trunks were clean, no moss, no bark damage, no fungal growth. Some of them still bore the long wet grooves from a recent fall. You could smell the sap on them, even from a few feet away. Did someone move these? Lee asked. Nobody answered. There were no chainsaw marks, no tire tracks, no signs of tools, just the unmistakable feeling that the entire clearing had changed shape around us. Subtly, quietly, we packed up quickly, the kind of fast instinctive packing you do when something's wrong, but no one wants to say it out loud. As we hiked out, I looked back once. The clearing already felt different again, as if we hadn't been there at all. We hiked in silence most of the way out. What should have been a straightforward trail back was slower than we expected. Nothing looked the same. Micah kept checking his GPS, frowning more each time. The app kept rerouting our path, even when we hadn't changed direction. It was like the ground beneath us was moving in real time, nudging us sideways. When we finally reached the gravel road, where we'd left the truck, the relief was quiet. No one said much, just threw packs in the bed and climbed in. We spent that night in a cheap lodge outside of Elk Park. 4 beds, thin walls, bad coffee. That's when Micah showed us the photo. "I took this last night," he said, thumbing through his phone. It was a grainy picture, low light, slightly out of focus, but clear enough. The rock formation, standing tall, same stacked slabs, same moss growth on the upper ridge. He swiped to the next photo, taken just minutes later, and the formation was gone. No motion blur, no collapsed pile, just open space. Darren shook his head. That's not possible. You couldn't move something like that without equipment." Micah said nothing. The next morning, we tried to locate the pin again, drive close to it, maybe hike back in daylight. We pulled up satellite maps, overlaid trails, but the GPS pin kept shifting. Each time we checked, it marked a slightly different location. Once it dropped into the middle of the lake, another time, a rock face too steep to walk. Eventually we gave up. Each of us drove our separate ways, a little quieter than when we came. That was 4 months ago. I still check the waypoint sometimes, just to see. It hasn't landed in the same place twice. But what sticks with me isn't the GPS glitch, or the missing rock, or the trees that looked freshly placed. It's what Lee told me, weeks later, after we'd stopped texting regularly. He said he kept dreaming of that clearing, not the version we camped in, the one after. He described standing there, alone, in a wider space, the trees bending slightly inward, a noise, low and constant, like something turning beneath the soil. He said every time he walked away in the dream, the clearing followed. He stopped camping after that, sold his gear. I haven't gone out since either, not because I'm scared of getting lost, but because I'm not sure we ever left. I'd hiked into the woods below Flat Top Mountain. 2 days after Thanksgiving. I needed quiet. I needed cold. Something clean and sharp to cut through the static I'd been carrying for months. Flat Top wasn't far from where I grew up. The trails here weren't marked well, which suited me fine. I followed a narrow footpath down past some rock outcrops and made camp at the base of a hollow, not far from a runoff creek that whispered through the trees. There was frost on the ground by mid-afternoon. The air had that biting stillness to it, the kind where even the birds seemed to hunker down. My boots crunched over patches of frozen pine needles. Everything smelled like wet bark and mineral water. I pitched my one-man tent under a spruce, boiled a bag of something flavorless over my little stove, and sat on a log watching the light die. The sun disappeared behind the ridge in minutes, and what little warmth had hung on slipped away with it. Around 9 p.m., I lit my lantern, a small metal one I'd had for years. It gave off just enough glow to keep the trees at bay. I was still sitting on that log when I noticed her, a figure, just outside the edge of the light. It was a girl, small, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Pale legs below a thin white dress, no coat, no shoes, barefoot, in that frost. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring straight at me. I froze. "Hey," I called out. No response. I stood slowly, my hands still warm from the lantern. "Are you okay?" Still nothing. No shift in posture, no flinch, no visible breath. I reached for the lantern's knob and turned it up a notch. The flame jumped slightly, casting longer shadows, but by the time I looked back, she was gone. No sound, no movement, just the woods again, cold and heavy. I walked the perimeter with the lantern, calling out, nothing but my own breath, bouncing back at me. The trees leaned in close here, and the ground was uneven, soft in places from old runoff. I half expected to see some parent stumble out behind her, scolding, laughing, apologizing, but the woods stayed empty. Eventually, I went back to the tent, lantern burning low beside me, until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I slept in short, broken pieces. By morning, the frost had hardened again. My breath fogged the tent flap as I unzipped it and stepped outside. The ground glistened silver, everything was still, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, small, barefoot. They started just a few feet from my tent, headed across the clearing toward the tree line. I followed. They led to the edge of the overlook, the place where the mountain dropped off into a steep ravine below. The trail just ended there. So did the prints. No return steps, no slide, no drag marks, just a single path, like someone walked calmly to the cliff's edge and vanished. I stood there longer than I should have, eyes scanning every inch of that rocky lip. My boots left deep impressions next to the smaller ones. I crouched down, touched one of them. The edges had frosted over again, but the shape was still clear. 5 small toes, high arch. No way someone could stand out here barefoot overnight and survive. I followed the edge a while, thinking maybe I'd find something, a dropped sweater, a broken branch, anything. But there was nothing, just stone, frost and silence. Eventually I walked back, slower this time. The cold felt heavier. Back at camp I noticed more things I'd missed the night before. A single long hair caught on the zipper of my tent, light brown, finer than mine. Could have been carried by the wind, sure, but it didn't feel like that. The log I'd been sitting on had a faint smudge on it now, almost like soot or ash, just on one end, like someone had been sitting there, someone small. I packed up. I didn't bother with breakfast, just wanted to get out before the wind picked up again. On the way back, the trail felt longer, the forest tighter. At the ranger station in Beaver Creek, I asked the guy behind the counter if anyone had reported a missing girl. He gave me a look. Not in years. You see something? I hesitated, just thought I might have. He leaned back in his chair. Back in the early 90s, a girl went missing near Flat Top, visiting family, took off from a trailhead barefoot. They searched for weeks, never found anything. Just prints heading toward a cliff. I didn't say anything. He shrugged. You'd be surprised how fast stories grow out there. Terrain does strange things to your head. I nodded, thanked him, and left. That was 3 months ago. I still have the lantern, still hike, though I don't camp alone much now. The thing that sticks with me isn't what I saw, it's what I didn't hear. No footsteps, no branches snapping, not even breath. Just that stillness, too perfect, too clean, and the way those footprints ended, like she never needed to leave them in the first place. We thought a few nights in the cranberry wilderness might do us some good. Jen and I had been circling each other for months. You spend enough time going quiet in a house full of noise, and eventually you stop hearing each other. It wasn't anger, just static. So we figured time away, real away, might help. No phones, no service, no screens, just the two of us, trees, and cold air to breathe. We drove into the heart of Pocahontas County, parked at a forestry gate, and hiked 5 miles into the backcountry. No trails, just topo maps and intuition. The trees closed in as we moved deeper, thick with moss and lichen, heavy with fog even in daylight. Everything smelled like rotting pine needles and old rain. We found a spot between 2 ridgelines, where the forest opened just enough to pitch the tent. High ground, dry. You could hear the river in the distance, a low hush that never stopped. There were no signs anyone had been here in years, not even boot prints. We set up camp in silence that first afternoon. Jen collected firewood, while I strung a tarp between 2 spruce. It was cold for October, the kind that seeps into your joints if you sit too long. We layered up, cooked freeze-dried chili, and sat near the fire until only embers crackled beneath us. Before bed, Jen pulled out her phone to record part of our audio journal, a small ritual we started back when we were hiking more. Just quick entries: where we camped, how we felt, what we noticed. Her voice was soft as she spoke into the mic, and I remember watching the steam of her breath as it lit in the lantern glow. Later, we zipped into the tent. The nylon was damp on the inside, and the floor smelled faintly of mildew. We lay there facing each other, not talking about anything serious, mostly memories of past hikes, old friends we'd lost touch with. Her head was tucked near my shoulder. The lantern hung dim at the top loop. Then it happened. In the middle of a sentence, I don't even remember what I was saying, we both stopped. A third voice, low, gravelly, from the far corner of the tent, behind Jen. It mumbled something, just a few words, muffled, like someone speaking through wet cloth. We froze. I sat up fast, thinking maybe someone had come up behind the tent. I flicked the lantern brighter and scanned every angle. Nothing, no shadows, no movement, just wet nylon walls, and our bags piled in the corner. Jen was pale. She whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. My mouth was dry. Sounded like words. We unzipped the flap and stepped out. It was quiet. No wind, no footsteps, just the rush of the river far off, and the occasional creak of trees shifting. We stood out there for 10 minutes, breath fogging the cold air, flashlights cutting through the mist too. But there was no one, nothing. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it had been the wind, or maybe an echo, something explainable. We crawled back in, zipped up, and didn't say much else. But I didn't sleep, not really, and I don't think Jen did either. It wasn't until the next morning that Jen remembered the recording. We were eating breakfast, instant oats, lukewarm, when she pulled her phone from the inside of her coat and scrolled through the files. Her hand was shaking a little. She found the clip from the night before. We both leaned in and listened. At first, it was just her voice, calm, me in the background, laughing about something, the soft hiss of the fire outside, then a quiet gap, and then it came, barely audible, buried in the background static, a voice, male, rough, whispering, "You don't belong here." Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Jen dropped the phone. It thudded softly against the tent floor. We just stared at each other. Neither of us had spoken those words. And the voice, it didn't sound like either of us. Older, frayed, tired. We packed fast, didn't talk about it. No journal entry that morning. Just tore down the tent, stuffed our gear, and left. The hike out felt longer, heavier. The trail seemed unfamiliar, though we'd just come through 2 days before. At one point, we passed a tree with a deep vertical scar down the trunk, like someone had dragged a blade through the bark. I could have sworn it wasn't there on the way in. When we reached the truck, Jen got in and locked the doors before I even had the tailgate shut. We didn't speak until we reached the paved road again. I don't remember what we said. Maybe nothing. Weeks passed. We never listened to the full recording again. Jen deleted it eventually. Said she didn't want it in the house. I didn't argue, but that voice stuck with me, not because it threatened us, but because it didn't sound angry. It sounded resigned, like whoever said it wasn't warning us out of malice. He just wanted to be left alone, like we'd stepped into a place that didn't want remembering, and woken something that was trying to forget. We haven't camped since, and sometimes, when the house is too quiet, and I hear the wind shift through the trees behind our yard, I swear I hear it again. Low, soft, "You don't belong here." I'd been warned not to go near the hollow. It wasn't a joke either. The guy at the gas station just outside War, West Virginia, old-timer, in a camo hat and cracked glasses, said it straight. "Laurel gets too thick down there. The air don't move right. Ain't even birds that pass through. You'll see. Feels like breathing under a wet tarp." I wasn't exactly looking for conversation, but he'd clocked my out-of-state plates, and noticed the topo maps on the passenger seat. I nodded, smiled politely, and said I'd be careful. I wasn't camping for fun. Not really. I'd spent 16 years on a ladder truck in Roanoke, and when the divorce hit last winter, I just sort of stopped sleeping, started driving aimlessly. I told myself it was about finding quiet, but it was more about avoiding anyone who knew me. McDowell County was perfect for that. Forgotten roads, hollow towns, and those steep folded hills that swallow you whole if you're not paying attention. I followed a side trail that cut down through an old coal logging road, now nothing more than 2 tire-wide ruts, flanked by thick laurel. The air got heavier the deeper I went, smelled like damp leaves and rusted water. By late afternoon, I'd found the place. It didn't look special, no sign, no strange tree formations, no cairns or carved rocks, just a low basin, ringed by laurel, that had grown wild and choked the sunlight out of everything underneath. The ground inside the hollow was softer, like the earth never fully dried. I noticed it right away. No birds, no insects, not even the buzz of a mosquito. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was full, pressing, like something just under the surface was waiting. But I'd already come this far. I set up camp just outside the edge of the hollow, close enough to see into it, but not fully inside. The wind barely moved. Even as dusk came on, my fire struggled to catch. Around 9 o'clock, I ate in silence. No owls, no tree frogs, just that empty pressure in the air. I crawled into the tent by 10, stared at the ceiling, thinking about the years I'd spent running into burning homes, then returning to a house that never quite felt like mine. Eventually, I drifted, but something woke me at 4:03 a.m. It was a sound, screaming, long, high-pitched, and broken, not like someone yelling for help. It was something being torn open. It echoed through the trees in this low, staggered rhythm, too loud to ignore, too wrong to explain. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, ears ringing from the volume. I hit the emergency number and held it to my ear. It kept screaming, a wet, throttled kind of sound. I spoke into the phone, half yelling, "There's someone out here, in trouble, near Flat Branch, maybe a mile east of mile marker 7, Laurel Hollow. I need someone out here now." The dispatcher never responded. I could hear static, nothing else. And then through the static, a single knock, clear, hollow, like someone tapping on a wood door from the inside. Then silence, not a click, not a disconnect, just absence. The scream was gone. I stayed in the tent until sunrise, sitting upright, the phone still clutched in my hand. No sleep. And when the sun came, I stepped out. The laurel hadn't moved. The hollow looked the same, dead, still. But now, something had shifted. I didn't know what yet, only that I didn't want to be there anymore. I packed up fast, didn't even heat coffee. The fire pit I'd made was undisturbed. My tent hadn't shifted. No animal prints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had passed through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched. I hiked out by 8 o'clock. The air felt different outside the basin. Lighter, sounds returned. Slowly, distant bird song, wind in the leaves. It was like crossing through an invisible membrane. Back at the gas station, I asked if anyone had reported trouble the night before. The same old guy was working. He gave me a long look. "You camped down there?" he asked. I nodded, told him what I heard. He didn't blink, just said, "That hollow don't echo right. Sound gets in, don't always come back out." I asked if anyone had ever gone missing there. He rubbed his jaw. "Couple, long time ago, before cell phones. Couple boys went in with bow gear, never came back. Dogs wouldn't even track past the laurel line. State wrote it off. Said maybe they slipped down into a mine cut, but they'd have found something." He paused. "You didn't go in the hollow, did you?" "No," I said, "just camped near the edge." He just nodded, slow and deliberate. "That's probably why you came back." I didn't say anything after that. That night, back in the motel in Princeton, I played the emergency recording from my call log. It played for 4 seconds, just static, and then at the end, faint, but unmistakable, a single knock. I don't hike anymore, not in the backcountry, not alone, and I never go near Laurel if the trees are too quiet, because silence like that, it's not empty, it's full of whatever's still listening.